When Margot pressed her knuckles softly against the heavy wooden door of the grand dining room, her heart throbbed with both anticipation and a pervasive sense of dread. She had heard that this estate dinner, orchestrated by her son Daniel's family, was intended to serve as the first official gathering where the division of Malvern Manor's inheritance would be set in motion. The mere thought of what lay ahead made her chest tighten. Just a few days prior, Daniel, her son, had phoned her, his voice warm but formal. "Mother, we're all so excited to see you. Please come tonight at 7. We have everything to discuss." For Margot, who had not laid eyes on her daughter or granddaughter in years, the notion of seeing them both again, even under such fraught circumstances, had felt like a glimmer of hope. It was a small comfort, and it was enough to spur her to accept Daniel's invitation, despite the unease that roiled within her. As Margot entered the room, she was greeted by the sight of an extravagant long table, stretching beneath a crystal chandelier that scattered pearly light upon a pristine white tablecloth. Rows of crystal wine glasses gleamed like fragile icicles, and every place setting was marked by polished silver cutlery, arranged with almost ritual precision. The room's original stone flooring reflected tiny prisms of light that danced across the polished surface, making the centuries-old oil paintings on the walls glimmer in a haze of color. Patrons at the table seemed to float within this luminous haze, each person caught in a silent tableau that teetered on the edge of something momentous. Margot felt the eyes on her as she made her way to the seat that had been reserved for her, and it was clear it was far from everyone else. The chair at which she would sit was tucked into a secluded corner, distanced from the main group, as if she were an interloper in her own family's midst. Her footsteps, though measured and careful, echoed like a distant memory as she took her place, trying to muster a polite smile. She thought she might feel comforted by the presence of family, but the arrangement of the seats shattered that illusion. It struck her that the symbol was intentional. They had put her in a corner, both literally and metaphorically, just out of reach of the rest of them. Across the table, Daniel was deep in conversation with Professor Reed, an old friend of her late husband's, chatting amicably as though they were merely enjoying an intellectual exchange over dinner. The soft hum of their discussion created a surreal juxtaposition to the knot of anxiety tightening Margot's throat. She forced herself to focus on Daniel's face. Those same features that had once cradled her in their mother-son bond now seemed resolute, distant, even composed, as though nothing extraordinary were about to happen. It was as though she had walked into someone else's world, disguised as her own. At the first course, the atmosphere seemed deceptively warm. Daniel's wife, Fiona, leaned back elegantly against the high-backed, carved chair across from Margot, as though she were settling into an ornate throne. Fiona's expression was graceful, but her eyes shimmered with something untold. She spoke in a measured tone. "Mother, we've prepared a special menu just for you tonight. We all hope you will enjoy it." Her words might have sounded kind under different circumstances, but in the hush of the candlelit dining room, every syllable seemed weighted with hidden meaning. Margot squeezed her napkin in her lap, determined to remain composed. She could almost taste the tension in the air as she scanned the faces around her. Beside Fiona sat Chelsea, Margot's daughter, whose eyes were calm but alert. It was as if Chelsea had been expecting this evening for weeks, if not months. Her gaze flickered toward Margot with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Beside Chelsea, their daughter, Margot's granddaughter, Lucas, giggled quietly, his laughter an unintentional defiance of the solemnity that clouded the room. He moved in small, agile circles around his chair, peering at his grandmother with bright, inquisitive eyes that seemed to ask a silent question. Why was everyone acting as though a storm were gathering? Lucas's childish innocence provided a stark contrast to the poised adults enveloped in their own unspoken motives. Daniel himself sat at the very head of the table, his posture erect, a model of composure. When he noticed Margot's displaced gaze, he smiled with polite warmth before speaking to his wife Fiona about the menu. We thought long and hard about which dishes to choose tonight. I asked myself, how would Dad have wanted us to remember these family gatherings? Mother, you remember that old photograph of our family? How all of us were packed around that dinner table, everyone so close. Daniel's tone seemed filled with nostalgia. Margot's heart fluttered at the mention of her husband's memory, recalling countless times she and Charles had recounted stories of those grand meals to their children. It stirred a sense of warmth, like a distant glow from a remembered hearth. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine that perhaps tonight's dinner would rekindle those lost bonds. Then, as if a winter wind had cut across the table, Fiona's voice interjected with perfect serenity but chilling precision. Yes, Daniel, but we mustn't forget that we need to protect the true heir of this estate. Those words landed like a hammer upon the fragile warmth Margot had just felt. In that instant, the room's polite chatter bent into a silence so thick that Margot could almost hear the candle flames stutter. Everyone's eyes flickered to her, though none dared meet her directly. Daniel's expression, which had been soft with familial reminiscence, hardened into something more guarded. Margot saw his jaw clench ever so slightly. She swallowed, feeling as though she were about to be put on trial, rather than simply sharing a meal. As the second course was served, delicate portions of sautéed quail, accompanied by a sumptuous potato gratin, the quiet in the room began to weigh on her like a physical presence. Each plate arrived with the clipped precision of a military formation, and every guest received their portion with what looked like practiced ease. But for Margot, each bite felt like chewing on porcelain, the food sliding down her throat with difficulty. She forced herself to eat, her appetite lost amidst the swirling anxiety in her chest. She tried to avoid the cold stares and whispered intrigues. Everyone's polite composure struck her as false, a sort of theater designed for her benefit or detriment. At last, the moment came for dessert to be served. A light vanilla panna cotta appeared, crowned with fresh berries. Margot's senses were on high alert, anticipating the inevitable shift in tone. Sure enough, Daniel cleared his throat and spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. Mother, there is a more important reason we asked you here tonight. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle like dust in the still air. Beside him, Margot's sister Louise sat tense, her gaze averted and her hands fidgeting beneath the table. The candlelight danced along Louise's downcast face, highlighting faint shadows of guilt in her expression. Margot, though her heart pounded, simply stared back at Daniel. suddenly aware that the room's atmosphere had shifted from nostalgic to ominous. Daniel continued, "You know that father has been gone for many years now. We recently held a family vote regarding the future of the manor. This vote concluded that you no longer have decision-making authority, and so we have decided to ask you to step aside from any claim on the inheritance." The air in the room constricted, as though an invisible hand had pressed in on her lungs. Margot's heart caught in her throat. Her son, her own flesh and blood, had just announced his plan to exclude her from the legacy she had believed was hers by right. For a moment, all she could do was fight the lump in her throat and the tightness in her chest. She felt her hands trembling on her lap, her nails digging into the napkin. She glanced around at the assembled faces, Fiona's composed countenance, untouched by compassion. Chelsea's expression, which seemed to combine disapproval with a wary vigilance. Lucas, his wide eyes betraying an innocent bewilderment as he watched his grandmother's silent reaction. Each of them felt like a wound delivered from a trusted hand. Margot wanted to speak, but her voice lodged in her throat. She rose from her chair, palms pressed to the tabletop until her knuckles turned white. As she lifted herself from that corner seat, the heavy air seemed to swirl around her, as if the room were holding its breath for what might come next. No one stood to stop her, and no one had the decency to say, "Let her go," or "Wait." They simply watched from behind masks of politeness. With her head held high, Margot swept past Daniel's startled expression and walked out of the dining room. A sudden hush replaced the clinking of silverware. Only her footsteps echoed as she made her way through an adjacent hallway, her mind racing with disbelief. The dim overhead lights flickered briefly, casting shifting shadows on the walls. When she reached the doorway that led to the outside, she felt a fierce wave of pain. But there was also something rising within her, a cold, resolute determination. She twisted the doorknob and stepped out into the night. The moment the door closed behind her, Margot felt the weight of that dinner lift from her shoulders, replaced by a potent blend of sorrow and anger. She walked down the winding driveway toward the gate, pausing only to gather herself. The soft glow of the street lamps did little to light her path, their light drifting as if reluctant to illuminate her way. The sky had turned a deep, ominous gray, and a slight mist began to gather, shrouding everything in a faint, mournful haze. As she walked, Margot felt her resolve hardening. This evening's betrayal would not go unanswered. From the moment Margot rose to leave that dinner, Chloe seized her arm as though determined to make her linger. Margot's eyes were fixed on the dim corridor ahead when she felt a delicate yet insistent touch at her elbow. She turned to find Chloe standing too close for comfort. Her thin white gloves still bore the faint impression of the delicate lace that had once seemed so benign when they first met. But now, those gloves felt like cold steel. Chloe's face was framed by the flickering light from the grand chandelier overhead, and Margot noticed, really noticed, how someone could look so polite, yet exude an aura of jagged cruelty. Chloe leaned toward Margot's ear, and in that quiet whisper, she uttered simple words that shattered Margot's world. "I have never loved you." Those words rang out like the sharpest crack of crystal on stone. They echoed in Margot's mind, reverberating against every fiber of her being. Around them, the other guests remained frozen, as though they were still part of the same suspended moment. Margot felt the air leave her lungs, the room narrowing to a pinpoint where only Chloe's whispered declaration existed. It was as if the years that had passed since she first became part of this family, years of love, betrayal, and suppressed resentment, had all crystallized into that single phrase. Her daughter-in-law's hidden hatred, long smoldering beneath polite smiles, now blazed to the surface. Margot opened her mouth to reply, to protest, to cry out, but nothing emerged. Instead, she felt an outsider in her own family, someone whose very presence seemed to disrupt the delicate facade that everyone else had constructed. Slowly, her lips parted, but all she could manage was a gasp, as though air itself had grown heavy and unwelcome. Chloe, apparently unbothered by Margot's reaction, drew back with a faint, almost sculpted smile. She let her words linger in the air. Your presence has always unsettled our family. While we have flourished, your shadow has hovered over us. It was an admission of deep, carefully concealed resentment, an utterance meant to wound at the point where Margot's confidence had once resided. Margot felt something shift inside her. In past years, she had glossed over Chloe's occasional glances, attributing them to the normal friction of blended families. But now the truth lay bare before her. Chloe's hostility was not an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, calculated stance. A lifetime of prejudice and contempt had been built into those crisp words. She pressed her hand against her heart, feeling the tightness there ease into a slow burn of indignation. Drawing herself up until her chin was high, she spoke in a voice that trembled but did not break. Chloe, I welcomed you into this family. I tried to treat you as a daughter-in-law should be treated, but you have made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. For a moment, her voice grew steadier. Yet here I stand, despite your bitterness. At that, the entire table turned to watch. Daniel leaped from his seat, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. Mother, you're imagining things. Chloe is a good woman. She's regretting what you're saying. His words came out like a plea, as though he were trying to patch over something he couldn't quite explain. Margot, feeling a sting of tears, forced herself to look at Daniel with unwavering eyes. Am I imagining it? She asked softly but firmly. Then she turned back to Chloe. Did I misunderstand you? Chloe shrugged, her lips twisting into a thin smile. No, you heard me correctly. Your presence has wrecked our family. We have worked so hard to build our lives here, and you've always been a source of unease. Those words dropped into Margot's soul like a guillotine blade. She realized in that moment how isolated she had been, how her attempts at warmth and inclusion were consistently rebuffed. The layered paintings on the walls, the grand dining table, the flickering chandelier, all of it suddenly felt like a stage set for cruelty. The family she thought she knew revealed itself as a place where she was never truly welcome. Suppressing a shudder, Margot took a small, shaky step back. The lacquered wood floor reflected the candlelight at her feet, as if calling her to retreat. Standing there, she felt a slow surge of strength rise from deep within her. If this dinner was only meant to humiliate me, she said quietly, then I thank you for making it clear. Her voice, though soft, carried an iron resolve. With that, she turned on her heel, the chair behind her screeching across the floor like a gunshot. No one rose to stop her. No one offered a balm of consolation. She glided past the silent, stunned expressions of her family and walked out of the dining room. In the hallway, her footsteps pounded like a war drum echoing through her mind. The portraits of ancestors lining the walls, once beacons of family pride, now appeared to her as silent sentinels bearing witness to her exile. She did not dare allow herself a single backward glance. She kept walking with the look of a woman who had been stripped bare but refused to cower. At the front door, she rested her palm on the cold brass doorknob, feeling its chill creep up her arm. In the courtyard beyond, the scent of night-blooming jasmine drifted on a breath of wind, a bittersweet reminder of days gone by. She exhaled a deep, trembling breath as she opened the heavy door and stepped into the garden, leaving behind the glowing windows and the murmur of hushed conversations. As the door closed, the muffled stillness of the house, no clink of glass or murmur of voices, underscored her solitude. The night air enveloped her in cool reassurance. She paused on the stone steps that descended into the lawn, gazing up at the sky where a waning moon hovered behind drifting clouds. In that quiet, she felt two opposing emotions collide: sorrow at her son's betrayal and a fierce sense of liberation that surged through her veins. Yes, the family she had known denied her rightful place, but tonight's exodus marked the first step toward something new, something her resilience would forge from the embers of her agony. As she moved down the gravel path, her footsteps stirred the small pebbles into a whispering chorus. Between the dancing shadows of the swaying pines, she could see the distant glow of the manor's windows, infused with the life and secrets she would never again inhabit. With every step, her resolve solidified. For so long she had bent herself to the expectations and grievances of others. Now, though alone, she would stand far straighter than ever before. After that night, Margot felt a clarity she had never known since Charles passed away. The following morning, under an overcast sky, she walked down the winding paths of Malvern's gardens until she arrived at a neglected secondary gate that led onto Elmwood Lane. This gate had been out of frequent use since Charles's death, an almost forgotten relic, and she unlocked it as she had once watched her father do when he wished to slip away from the formalities of the main entrance. The key clicked in the rusted lock, and the gate swung open, revealing a dusty lane lined by ancient elms whose branches arched overhead like a hallowed cathedral. Margot welcomed the descent into this quieter realm. She walked for several blocks until she reached a modest, understated home, the place where Daniel, his wife Chloe, and their children had lived. The house, constructed of weathered brick and crowned by a small gabled roof, stood in gentle contrast to the flamboyant opulence of Malvern. The garden was modest but well tended, with a few rose bushes still holding onto their blooms, despite the hint of autumn chill in the air. As Margot approached the front door, she saw Chloe's sleek black sedan in the driveway, a single sign that this residence still belonged, at least on paper, to her son's family. Taking a breath to steel her nerves, Margot rang the doorbell. The sound echoed within, as though announcing an unwanted guest. The door opened after a moment, and she met Chloe's gaze directly. No polite half-smile this time. Chloe's lips were set in a harsh line, her eyes half-lidded in a mixture of disdain and nervousness. Margot's chest tightened, but she held her ground. Chloe, she said, her voice just loud enough to reach the tip of Chloe's sharp chin. We need to talk. Chloe's nose wrinkled. About what? You have no claim here, Mother. Her words, meant to keep Margot out, only poured gasoline on Margot's growing flame. Margot took a step forward. I am still your son's mother. Daniel has not yet offered me an inch of peace, but I'd like to settle whatever misunderstandings remain, once and for all. Chloe's eyes flicked past her, as though trying to find an escape route. You mean you want to talk about the will? I have nothing more to say to you. Come back after you see your attorney. She attempted to close the door, but Margot slipped her foot into the gap, holding it halfway closed. I do see my attorney, Margot said evenly, and you won't get away with pretending that I have no rights. You know exactly why I'm here. Now, Chloe's gaze sharpened like a hawk spotting prey. She simply stared before the door snapped shut against Margot's shoe. The click of lock followed as Chloe returned the bolt to place. Margot felt the door vibrate, and she heard Chloe's heavy steps receding inside. A sharp zip of anger shot through her. Yet, in that instant, Margot recognized that physical barriers would not deter her. She had a right to be here, and Chloe's door would not keep her away for long. That evening, Margot returned to Malvern Manor, carrying her father's final will, a notarized volume she had discovered hidden in his study. The document went beyond merely assigning property. It spelled out Chloe's complete exclusion from any share of the estate. According to the will's terms, Chloe was to receive nothing, no money, no land, no entitlement to the manor itself. Instead, the manor's entire ownership was vested in Margot, with protection clauses that rendered any attempt by others to contest it null and void. Ethan Pierce, Chloe's husband, had a nominal token of an interest held in trust, subject only to the absolute control of the estate's executor, Margot herself. Margot presented this official will to Daniel in his father's old study, an oak-paneled room lined with leather-bound volumes. She watched him, waiting for a reaction. Daniel's face paled when he recognized the letterhead of the notary public and read the date, 3 weeks before David's death. He stammered, "But this can't be. I saw Dad's signature from last year." His voice cracked with genuine confusion and shame. August of last year was a previous draft. Margot replied calmly, her eyes unwavering. This is the final version. It was secured with the notary's stamp and kept sealed specifically to ensure that, if there was ever an attempt to harm my rightful inheritance, the real terms would come to light. Daniel sank into a chair across from her, rubbing his temples as though trying to erase the revelation from his skull. I trusted that Chloe would be part of our family's legacy. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, though the question felt more like an accusation. Margot folded her arms. You were too busy making plans to consult the woman you claim to love, who clearly felt enough distrust to leave me out of her life, she said, her tone cool. You both forgot that it's possible to have both love and respect. Your father saw that flaw. Daniel bowed his head, speechless. Across the room, Chelsea rose from her seat and approached. Mom, she said softly, her voice quivering. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. Margot nodded. It's all revealed now. Chloe has forfeited her right to anything here, and Daniel, you need to accept that. The manor is mine, and you will respect that. If you want a place here, you will abide by our father's wishes. At that, Daniel turned away, stricken by shame and grief while Chelsea lingered a moment longer, her eyes filled with contrition. She placed a gentle hand on Margot's arm and whispered, "I'll make it right. I swear I will." Margot squeezed her daughter's hand. That night, as they processed the finality of the will, Chloe and Ethan's faces lingered in Margot's thoughts, their arrogance, their steadfast denial of her legitimacy. Now they faced a future in which they owned nothing. The once grand illusions they had held were reduced to media gossip and hushed rumors. It would not take long for the news to spread. Chloe had no legal claim. Ethan's limited stake was only held in trust, under Margot's control, and Margot alone was entitled to manage and protect her father's legacy. The morning after the will was revealed, Margot sat at the breakfast table in the manor's sunlit conservatory, overlooking a sprawling lawn dotted with ancient trees. The first tendrils of dawn had crept across the sky, painting it in soft pastel hues. As she sipped her coffee, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in a matter of weeks. She no longer had to fear Chloe's whispered malice, Daniel's indifference, or the envy of any other relative. She had, at last, claimed her rightful place. Her breakfast companion that day was her mother's old friend and family attorney, Victor, who had been instrumental in brokering a way for her to enforce the will. He pointed to a carefully drafted document before him, an official notice to be sent to all relevant parties, including Chloe, Ethan, and younger relatives who might harbor illusions of entitlement. The notice made it clear, by order of the Board of Harrington Holding and pursuant to the last will and testament of Charles W. Harrington, it is hereby declared that Ms. Margot Harrington holds all legal and equitable title to Malvern Manor and its associated assets. Effective immediately, any claims or financial transactions related to Chloe Harrington or Ethan Pierce are hereby rendered null and void. Further legal action will be taken against any attempt to encroach upon Ms. Harrington's rights. Margot read the notice over one final time. She felt a wave of calm certainty, a sense that, at last, the labyrinth of injustice that had bound her for so long was being dismantled piece by piece. She asked Victor to prepare the official press release. Later that afternoon, the headline appeared in a prestigious local newspaper that covered the entire county, with a bold front-page line, "Harrington Estates control firmly in Margot's hands." Below the headline, the subtext read, "The contested will of the late Charles W. Harrington has been validated, confirming that his daughter, Margot Harrington, inherits the entirety of Malvern Manor. Chloe Harrington's claim has been denied, and Ethan Pierce's share is limited to a nominal trust. Family members must now accept the court's ruling or face legal consequences." Within hours, social media channels erupted with commentary. The hashtag #Margot Harrington trended, along with thousands of messages, some supportive, some critical, but all fixated on the reversal. People felt compelled to weigh in, evoking sympathy for Margot, expressing outrage on Chloe's behalf, or simply marveling at the BBC-style drama of it all. By evening, news crews arrived at Malvern to interview Margot if she wished to speak, though she declined. Instead, she recorded a brief statement through her attorney's office. "I am humbled by the responsibility placed upon me and grateful that my father's final wishes have been honored. Malvern Manor is more than a family home. It is a legacy of love, hard work, and service to our community. I intend to uphold my father's vision with integrity and compassion. A few days later, just as autumn turned to winter, Margot found herself standing before her son David's grave once more. She wore a simple black coat, the wind ruffling her silver hair. The cemetery was quiet, save for a gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional birdsong weaving through the bare branches overhead. She paused beside the white marble headstone, etched with a short inscription: David James Harrington, 1989 to 2024. Beloved son, forever missed. She knelt, her breath visible in the cold air, and placed a single fresh rose atop the grave. Though she had visited him once before, this time felt different, like an unspoken promise to herself and her departed child. She gently ran her fingertips over the cold engraving of his name, as though hoping to impart her renewed sense of purpose into the stone itself. Dear David, she whispered, her voice breaking over the words, I should have spoken to you sooner. I thought love was enough, but love without action is hollow. When you were frightened, I did not find you. When you needed me, I was absent. For all that time, I thought I could make up for it later. But later never comes. She swallowed and took a deep breath, letting the chilled air fill her lungs. I realize now that if I had shown you just how proud I was of you, truly shown you, not just in my heart, but in my words, things might have been different. By the time I found the courage, you had left. Margot closed her eyes, picturing David's youthful face as he had looked on that very spot many years ago, when he had raced into her embrace after kindergarten or presented her with a hand-drawn card on Mother's Day. Tears welled up, but she let them fall. They were tears of both sorrow and relief, grief for the lost time, and gratitude that she could finally say what had gone unsaid for so long. Straightening up, she continued softly, This time, I will keep my promise. I came here not only to say goodbye, but also to say thank you for teaching me how to love more deeply. I carry your memory with me, and it guides me every single day. She hovered there a moment longer, letting her words settle in the silent air. When finally she turned to leave, she felt lighter than she had in years. The sense of enduring guilt was softened by the knowledge that she had at last spoken her truth. Though David's childhood had not been perfect, and though she had failed him when he needed a father figure the most, she felt a new purpose woven from that same failure, to live in a way that honored both his memory and the values he embodied. Shortly afterward, Margot made her way back to Malvern Manor. The sky was overcast, with thin gray clouds drifting languidly across the horizon. There was a certain clarity in the gloom. It felt as though the world had been cleansed of illusions. On the steps leading up to the grand entrance, Margot paused to catch her breath and glanced back at the place she had just left behind. Each gravestone, each narrow path, each leaf drifting in the late autumn breeze had urged her to confront the shadows in her own life. Now, that confrontation had left her ready to move forward, unburdened, in a way she never had been. When she entered the study, she found Victor awaiting her with a stack of documents he'd prepared: financial statements, updated share certificates, and, most crucially, an official grant making her the legal executor of the Harrington estate, with full right to manage the family companies and the manor's holdings. The clatter of papers and Daniel's scattered attempts at mitigating the fallout were already well underway. But Margot felt a serene detachment. She had plenty to keep her busy, updating records, communicating with a cadre of lawyers and accountants, writing a series of letters to notify creditors and business partners that Malvern was secure. After she signed the executor's document, her signature flowing across the dotted line in neat, assured script, Victor sat back and regarded her. "Madam," he said, "you now hold all the legal authority. I will dispatch copies of the will and related documents to every solicitor involved. From this moment forward, your decisions regarding the estate are final." Margot nodded and allowed herself a small, reflective smile. Inside her, a sense of profound gratitude welled up. Gratitude to her father for entrusting her. Gratitude to the many years that had taught her how to fight for the place she deserved. And gratitude to David, whose memory had propelled her to this point. For decades, she had lived at the mercy of others' expectations. Now, for the first time, she would live on her own terms. Some months passed, and the once bustling boardrooms and executive suites Margot had frequent patronage of were replaced by quiet, purposeful days. She muted her phone, checking it only to review the occasional drawing from her granddaughter Lucas, or to confirm a donation received by the new foundation she had established, the LeClaire Legacy Trust for Women. The mornings began with walks in the nearby municipal park. With her notebook in her coat pocket, she would jot down passing thoughts. This morning's breeze felt like David's whisper. When I watch children play, it's as if time stands still. These notes were precious to her, far more so than any corporate accolade. Words on paper became her compensation, her small yet meaningful transactions with life. One bright morning in midwinter, a reporter called with a request. "Madam Harrington, we'd like to feature your story under the headline, 'The Woman Who Turned Down a Fortune for a Far Greater Cause.'" Margot reflected for a moment and agreed, with one stipulation. "Please do not mention money. I chose a different path, truth." When interviewed, the reporter asked, "What is truth, Miss Harrington?" Her reply was instant and unwavering. "Truth is acknowledging what you have missed and believing it's not too late to set things right. I did not attend my son's funeral, but in the end, I spoke with him. I honored his dream. And I learned that sometimes you need to walk beside someone rather than always running ahead." The reporter noted that down and then, after a pause, scribbled in his notebook, "A man does not truly change when he loses his son. He changes when he finally seeks to understand him." One chilly evening, as twilight descended over Malvern Manor, Margot found herself on the same balcony where, not so long ago, she had promised herself to rise from the ashes of betrayal. Now, however, when she looked out, she saw not a vast, empty landscape of sorrow, but a place renewed by compassion and purpose. The house, once a fortress of her family's financial empire, had become a crucible for healing. Its halls, which had echoed with whispered treacheries, now rang with the gentle clasp of helping hands. The wind carried the faint murmurs of the city beyond. Car horns, the distant hum of engines, a dog barking somewhere off in the night. Yet here, amidst those blooming garden shadows, Margot felt a deep, abiding peace. She closed her eyes and imagined her father standing beside her. She imagined his proud, kind eyes assuring her that she had done, finally, what was right. As she opened her eyes again, a soft footstep beside her indicated Riley's presence. The young woman's silhouette, standing under the gentle glow of the balcony lamp, reassured Margot that the next generation would continue her father's legacy, only now in a manner rooted in compassion and genuine understanding. Riley's face was lit with quiet determination. Margot reached over and placed a warm hand on her niece's shoulder. "I am home at last," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I am who I was meant to be." The wind ruffled her hair as though congratulating her. Together they gazed out at the manor's sweeping lawns, the old oaks, and the meandering pathways leading toward new horizons. In that moment, the entire estate seemed to exhale, a collective sigh of contentment, knowing that from this day forward, it would not just be a symbol of wealth and tradition, but a beacon for truth, compassion, and the enduring bonds of family. Bonds redefined not by what was taken, but by what was courageously reclaimed.